A few years ago, I was driving back from work pretty late at night. I was going home, and normally I don't work quite that late, but it had been a long one. At this point, I was extremely hungry, and I hadn't had a chance to eat in a long time. On the drive home, I didn't normally pass by many restaurants. I happen to live a little bit out in the country, and there aren't a bunch of places to go to, so I was keeping my eyes out for a place to stop, and I remember I pulled off the highway and I took an exit. My options there were a gas station, and then a little ways down the road I saw a sign for a Subway. At this point, it was probably like 10-something at night. I didn't know if Subway would still be open, but I thought that I would go and look. So when I drove down the road, it appeared as though the Subway was open. The lights inside were on, and I remember that I thought I saw somebody in there when I was driving into the parking lot. However, there weren't any other cars in the parking lot. I decided to park, get out, and go to the door to see. When I did so, the door opened up and I realized that it was in fact open. At least I thought. After walking inside the Subway, it was very quiet and I didn't see anybody inside anymore. I walked up to the counter where you start ordering. I figured the employee was maybe in the back or something, and after they heard me coming in, they would probably come out to take my order. Just a few seconds after getting to the counter though, the lights suddenly turned off, and it went almost completely dark. The only light was coming in from the large windows that they had in the front of the store. I looked around wondering what was going on. After maybe 30 seconds or so, I figured that I would just leave. But before I walked away, I heard some noises coming from the back, which was around the corner and out of my sight. That's when I saw a man coming into view. It looked like he had entered from the back room, and I thought that it was an employee at first. I couldn't see the man very well at all because of the dark, but with the light that I did have from the window, I noticed that this man was not wearing a Subway uniform in any way. He just stood there for a moment looking at me. I decided that I would leave still. This situation overall just seemed very strange, so I began to head over to the door. But when I did, I heard the man start walking from behind the counter. I didn't really know where he was going, but it actually sounded like he was going towards me. When I reached the doors, I glanced back and saw the guy swiftly walking my way. He was maybe 20 feet away from me. The man did not say anything, and neither did I. I just left the Subway and started going back to my car. I then heard the man actually leave the restaurant after me. I looked behind me and the guy was getting closer. At that point, I wasn't sure what else to do, so I just started running. I sprinted all the way to my car, unlocked the door, and got inside. Luckily, I didn't have to back up to leave because the parking lot connected to another one, so I just hit the gas and drove away from there. The man had almost reached my car, but I left him standing there in the parking lot and I drove away. I then went all the way back home, not bothering to stop any place else. I was too creeped out by the situation and made something to eat at home. Now, I still don't know exactly what was going on in that Subway. I'm guessing that they were closed, but for some reason the door was open. Was the man that I saw attempting to steal from the place, or was he just chilling in the back? I really don't know, but I do know that he chased after me, and I'm glad that I got away. I used to work at Subway years back. The job was exactly what you would expect, and I liked it. I remember that something really creepy happened one time though. I still randomly think about it here and there. One time I was working a closing shift. I think we closed at like 9 p.m. or something like that, and I had been working since sometime in the afternoon. Our Subway location was in a good spot and would get really busy during certain times. At around 5 p.m. it started to get busy, and by 6 there were lots of people in line. I remember that I was kept very busy during this time and was making sandwiches. On this night, I believe that we had 3 of us working, and then 2 of us would be there until the close. So we had 2 people making the subs and 1 person on the register at this particular moment. Still, even with this, the line was kept somewhat long for quite a while. I remember that the restaurant was overall crowded, but I looked up and I noticed this guy in line that was just staring at me. It wasn't like he was just looking at me or in my direction, but intensely staring at me. I did not recognize the guy, and I didn't look at him for very long before looking away. Then I focused back on what I was doing. Sometime later, maybe like 5 minutes, I looked up again randomly, and I noticed the guy still staring. I looked away again and was not looking forward to when it would be his turn in line. However, like 10 minutes at least went by, and I didn't have to make a sandwich for the guy. After a while, I looked around, and I noticed that he was not in line anymore. But unfortunately, he was still inside of the restaurant, and he was still staring at me. I just looked away again and went back to work. We were all so busy that I didn't have time to point him out to a coworker or anything. I barely had time to wonder why this guy was staring at me. I just knew that I didn't know who he was or why he was looking at me. Finally, a while later, things quieted down a little bit. I realized the man was still there, and I decided to take my break. So I went into the back for a while, and when I came back out to work, the man was gone. I thought that was the end of it. At that point, I only had a couple of hours of work left. Things were very quiet for the rest of the night. There were a few customers here and there, but not many. It was just me and another coworker that were there until close. At probably like 20 or 30 minutes before closing time, I remember that the guy was back, but this time, he was outside of the restaurant. There are big windows at the front of the subway, and the guy was staring right inside. When I noticed him, I got so creeped out. During this time, I was alone behind the counter, and my coworker was in the back. The man outside was just staring at me like before, and this was several hours after he had last been there. I was so creeped out by this that I went into the back to get my coworker. When we both came out, the man was gone. We closed up a short time later without getting any more customers. Then when we left, I looked around the parking lot for the guy in case he was staring at me someplace else, but he wasn't. I didn't notice him, and we left after that. I was a part-time employee, so I did not work every day, and I remember I don't think I worked for the next few days after that. When I returned to work, I did not see the guy again. I still don't know who he was or what he was doing. One time last year, I went to a Subway at night. I was just going to get a sub, and the Subway restaurant was only about 5 minutes from my house. It was located in a quiet strip mall that had several other businesses in it. So I went there at probably about 8 p.m. I remember that it was completely dark out because it was the springtime, and the area was also pretty quiet. Most of the other businesses in the strip mall were now closed. I walked inside of the Subway and I ordered. It didn't take very long because nobody else was there, and then I got my sandwich. I remember that when I was getting a drink from the fountain, I noticed a man passing by on the sidewalk out front outside of the Subway. The man was somewhat tall, had shaggy-looking hair, and was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. So I remember that he looked in the window at me as he was passing by, but then he continued walking and went out of sight. After I got my drink and stuff, I walked out and I left the Subway. I was starting to walk to my car in the parking lot when I heard somebody approaching me. There were footsteps a little behind me and to my right. I looked over and I saw the same man. He was approaching me, and before I knew it, the man was right next to me. I stopped to see what the guy wanted. When I did, he asked me if I could give him a ride over to the gas station and pointed in the direction. The way he pointed, there was a gas station within sight, and it really wasn't that far away at all. It was kind of in the direction of where I lived too. Obviously, I didn't want to give this man a ride though. I didn't know him or anything, so I said to the guy that I was in a hurry to get home. But as I started to walk away, the man followed. He said that it wasn't far, and he just needed to go to the gas station and was meeting a friend there. I finally said yes and told the man that I would give him a ride. I feel stupid saying that, because obviously it's not smart to give a ride to a random person you first see at night. But that's what I did, and I was just hoping that it would be a quick drive to drop the man off. I mean, it would take less than a minute to get to the gas station, and it was within sight. It was just a little bit to the left of the strip mall and almost behind it. And the gas station was open, and there looked to be several other cars there. So the man got in the passenger side of my car, and I got in the driver's seat. After getting inside, the man was nice and said thank you to me, and said that he was really cold and didn't want to walk all that way. It was pretty cold out with it being the early spring and nighttime, so I left the parking lot of the strip mall where the subway was. Then I drove out of the parking lot onto a busier street. After we went to the left, the gas station was just to the right, but the entire drive, neither me or the man said anything. It was just awkward silence. After I turned into the gas station, I pulled into a parking space in the back side of the parking lot. It had been a quick and easy drive. When I stopped though, the man did not immediately get out of my car. So I said something like, "All right, have a good night now." But he didn't get out. He just sat there. It was really awkward for like 30 seconds, and I was getting a bad feeling about this whole situation. At this point, I was kicking myself for letting a stranger get in my car at all. So finally, I said to the man, "We're here. Isn't this where you wanted to go?" The man finally spoke. He said this wasn't the correct gas station. He said it was another one that was a ways down the road, and he pointed to the east. That was not the direction that I was going. I thought the man needed to go to this gas station, and I was sure that's where he pointed. I told him this is where I thought he was going, and he said no, as if I was stupid for thinking that. I told him that I was not going in that direction and I had to go home now. He didn't respond, and he didn't get out either. This man seemed really annoyed with me that I somehow didn't know exactly where he was going. I told him I couldn't go there, and I wasn't going any further. He did not seem happy about it, and did not get out of my car. The man told me to drive him to the other gas station. I was getting pretty nervous. I didn't know if this guy could possibly be dangerous or something like that. I asked him to get out of my car, and he said no. At this point, I didn't really know what to do. Then, as we were sitting there, I noticed a police car pulling into the gas station. When I saw this, I was thinking maybe I should try to get the cops' attention. But as I was still thinking that, the man next to me suddenly got out of my car. He opened the door, left my vehicle, and then started quickly walking away. The guy started heading towards the building, and then I just left. I went home, and I told myself that I would never let a stranger in my car again. Looking back, I'm not sure what that guy was planning to do. I figured that when he saw the cop, he knew he was up to no good and he left. I'm really glad that the police officer pulled into the parking lot when he did. This happened about 5 years ago. I was working and it was 12 p.m., time for my lunch break. I worked in an office building right near the city. From my job, there were a few places that I could go to get food. Sometimes I would also bring my own lunch. However, on this day, I walked over to Subway. It took me maybe about 5 minutes to walk there from my building, so it was very convenient and I went there all the time. I just had to walk down a sidewalk, turn, and go down another one for a short distance. But on this day, when I got inside of the Subway, I noticed that there was a really long line. I considered going someplace else, but decided not to. Most places were pretty busy at this time, because many people like me were on their lunch breaks. So I stood there and hoped that the line would move quickly. As the line moved, more people entered the Subway and the line grew behind me. It was moving at a decent rate though. I remember when I had been inside for at least 5 minutes, I felt my phone vibrating in my pocket. I was getting a phone call, and I took my phone out to see who it was that was calling me. But when I looked, I did not recognize the number. So at that point, I put my phone back in my pocket. But just moments later, after the call ended, I felt my phone vibrate from receiving a text. So I once more took out my phone and looked at it. At this point, it was nearing my turn to order, and there were maybe 2 or 3 people ahead of me. When I looked at the text, it was from the same unknown number that had just called me. The text said, "I'm in line behind you." I was confused after reading this. Was this a work friend pranking me or something? I instantly turned around and looked. By now, at least 10 people were in line behind me, but I didn't recognize anyone. The person directly behind me was a woman who I had never seen before, and she was not on her phone or anything. I didn't really think it would be her, but everybody else looked like total strangers as well. Some of them stared at me now because I had completely turned around and was looking at everybody. I turned back and texted the number asking who it was. However, they did not immediately respond. This was really weird, but soon it was my turn and I ordered. After getting my sub, I left the Subway restaurant, But before walking out, took a look at everybody in there once again. I still didn't notice anybody strange and didn't recognize anyone. So I left the subway and walked back to my job. There was a decent amount of other people out on the sidewalk too, because we were so close to the city, but nothing stood out as strange there either. So I got back to work and went the rest of the day without anything weird happening. I left work at 5 p.m. and started to drive home. It took between 15 and 20 minutes to drive back to my house. I remember that when I was driving on the highway, I got another phone call. It was from that same unknown number. This time, I decided to answer it. When I did, a voice that seemed to be a male's spoke. He said in a whispery voice that he was driving behind me. I asked who it was, but the guy then hung up. Once more, I was very confused. I looked in my mirror and did not notice anything out of the ordinary. There was nobody riding my tail or anything. The highway was very busy though, and it was rush hour. So there were tons of other cars on the road behind me. It could have been any of them. I continued to drive home, but didn't want to go to my house. So when I got to my exit, instead of driving home, I drove to the police station. When I got there, I didn't notice anybody follow me in. Then I went inside and I told them about what happened. But unfortunately, there wasn't really anything that could be done. They said it was more than likely just a prank, but to not hesitate to call if anything else happens. So after that, I blocked the number that had been messing with me, and I drove the rest of the way home. I wasn't followed by anyone, and after that day, I received no more strange texts or calls. Maybe that was just a prank, but I still don't know who did it or why. I mentioned it to several friends, and nobody ever took responsibility. It remains a mystery to me to this day. This is something that happened recently when I was working at Subway. I've worked here for almost a year now, and I work in a Subway that I would describe as average. We're not in a super busy area, but we're also not in the middle of nowhere. So one day, at a quiet time in the afternoon, this man came in. I was working behind the counter, and there wasn't anybody else in the store at the time, except for my coworker who was in the back. I'm guessing that it was like 2 or 3 p.m., kind of between the rush of lunch and dinner when it was quiet. So the man walked in and came to the spot where you start to order. When I asked him what he wanted, he said that he wanted one of the $5 footlongs. Right away, the guy did not seem to be in the greatest of moods. I asked him what kind of bread he wanted and started to go towards the breads to get a footlong. But before he answered, I thought I should tell him that the footlongs are not $5 anymore. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the $5 footlong promotion hasn't been around in at least 10 years. When I told him this, the man was not happy about it at all. I kind of thought the guy was half joking when he said it in the first place, because it's been so long, but apparently he wasn't. He asked me what the price was, and when I told him, he basically started going on a rant. He said how we always advertised the $5 footlong for so long, and claimed that the last time he went to Subway he had got one. Well, I don't know when exactly that was. It could have been years ago, but we certainly never had $5 footlongs in the time that I worked at this Subway. I told him that I didn't make the prices, I just worked here. He started saying how he was going to call up Subway corporate and he was going to call my manager and stuff. I really didn't know what the guy's problem was. Finally, he asked me how cheap I was willing to go on the price of the sandwich, as if I was selling something to him at a pawn shop. I told him that I couldn't negotiate the price. I didn't have that kind of power. The man then cursed at me, which made me angry, and I yelled at him to get out. But this only made him more upset. He started ranting again about Subway and me, and ended it by saying that I should be fired. I told him to leave or I was going to call the cops on him. My coworker, who had been in the back, now finally came out to see what was causing the commotion. He also told the man to leave. Finally, the guy leaned into me and said that he would be back for me, whatever that meant. Then he turned and stormed out. It was the craziest thing. My coworker and I talked about the incident for a while. We were just glad that the guy was gone. Soon, we got some other customers and went on with the day. It got busy for a while in the evening, and then it quieted down again at night. My coworker left and went home, and then I was alone to close the store. Normally, things would be very quiet in the last hour. So we got probably just one customer in the final hour that we were open that night. Then at 9 o'clock, we were closed. I went over and locked the door, then headed back to clean up before I could leave. But as I was doing so, I suddenly heard the sound of someone trying to open the door. I looked up and saw the same man from earlier who was angry about the $5 footlong. I got a bad feeling when I saw him. He stood at the door and then started loudly knocking on it. He saw me behind the counter and then started to yell at me. I yelled at him to go away and said that we were closed. The man yelled something else, but I couldn't really understand it. Then I went into the back. I hoped that the guy would go away. I did some cleaning in the back area and didn't hear him for a little while. When I came back though, he was still there. Now he was just kind of pacing back and forth on the sidewalk out front. It didn't seem like he was going to leave. I finished up all the things that I had to do and then I was ready to go. But when I did, the man was still there, pacing back and forth out front. I knew that he was waiting for me, so at that point, I called the police. I told them the story of the guy and how he was out front. Then I just waited. When the police got there, the man was still out front. They talked to him and eventually got him to leave. After that, I was finally able to go home. Looking back at that situation, I feel lucky that I locked the doors right at 9 p.m. when we closed. The man got there just minutes later. If he had gotten inside the restaurant, I don't know what would have happened. Since that incident, I haven't seen the guy, and I'm hoping that I never do again.